The morning alarm rang across Station Kepler 7 like thunder in space. Deep in the metal halls of the Galactic Defense Academy, students from 40 different worlds woke up to another day of training. Some had scales that shined in the artificial light. Others had fur or skin that changed colors. A few breathed different air through special masks, but they all had one thing in common. They wanted to become the best warriors in the galaxy. Deho Kim rolled out of his narrow bed in the human quarters. At 24 years old, he was one of the youngest students at the academy. He was also the only human in his class. His black hair was messy from sleep and his brown eyes looked tired, but his mind was already sharp and ready for the day ahead. The academy cafeteria buzzed with different languages and sounds. Deho grabbed his breakfast tray and looked around. Most tables were filled with groups from the same species. The tall blue Velkari sat together, their forearms moving as they talked. The huge rock-like Draknor creatures made deep rumbling sounds that shook the floor. The quick silver Nexians moved so fast, their words sounded like musical notes. Deho sat alone at a small table near the window. Through the thick glass he could see the stars and the distant glow of 3 different suns. Space was beautiful, but it was also dangerous. Every species in this room knew that. That was why they were here. Human. A deep voice made Deho look up from his food. Kessatar stood beside his table. The Velkari was almost 7 feet tall, with smooth blue skin and 4 muscled arms. His black eyes looked down at Deho with clear dislike. Behind him stood 2 other Velkari students who nodded at everything their leader said. Yes? Deho kept eating his breakfast. I hear your species is new to space war. Tell me, how many battles has your kind won against real enemies? Deho chewed his food slowly. We have been fighting wars for thousands of years, just not in space. Kestar laughed. The sound was like metal scraping metal. Fighting on one little planet does not make you warriors. Here you will learn what real combat means. The Velkari walked away, his followers close behind. Other students at nearby tables had stopped eating to watch. Some looked sorry for the human. Others seemed to agree with Kestar. Deho finished his meal in peace. He had heard words like this before. Humans were new to the galactic community. Only 50 years ago, they had made first contact with alien species. Most of the galaxy saw them as weak newcomers who got lucky with space travel. The main classroom was huge. It could hold 200 students easily. Today, only 47 sat in the curved rows of seats. These were the advanced combat students, the best from their home worlds. They would graduate in 3 months and become officers in their planetary defense forces. Commander Valix walked to the front of the room. He was a Threnodi, a species known for their love of war and their skill with weapons. His gray skin was covered in old battle scars. His 4 arms moved like a dancer as he spoke. Today is your final weapons test. His voice carried clearly through the room. You have learned to use plasma rifles, energy swords, gravity hammers, and quantum blades. You have studied the art of war from 50 different worlds. Now I want to see what you have truly learned. The students sat up straighter. This was what they had been waiting for. You have 1 hour, Valix continued. In the workshop behind this room, you will find materials from across the galaxy. Your job is simple. Make a weapon. Any weapon. The only rule is this: you must use your own hands and your own mind. No help from others, no machines to do the work for you. He paused and looked across the room. His eyes stopped on different students as he spoke. I will judge your weapons on 3 things. First, how deadly they are. Second, how clever the design is. Third, how well you can use them in combat. The student with the best weapon will receive the highest honors. The student with the worst will repeat this entire year. Excited whispers filled the room. Some students were already planning what they would build. Others looked worried about the time limit. The workshop is now open. You may begin. The rush to the workshop was like a stampede. Students pushed past each other to get to the best materials first. The room was filled with everything a warrior could want. Sheets of nanometal that could cut through anything. Plasma cores that burned hotter than stars. Crystal formations that could focus energy into deadly beams. Gravity generators small, enough to hold in one hand. Deho stood in the doorway and watched the chaos. Velkari students grabbed for the energy crystals. Draknor heavies picked up the biggest metal pieces they could find. Nexians moved like lightning to collect precision tools. The human walked slowly through the workshop. He passed tables covered with advanced technology. He ignored boxes full of rare metals from distant worlds. Other students gave him strange looks as he moved toward the back of the room. Near the rear wall was a simple closet marked cleaning supplies. Deho opened it and looked inside. Mops, buckets, bottles of soap, and cleaning rags filled the shelves. At the very back, leaning against the wall, was an old wooden broomstick. He reached in and picked it up. The wood was smooth from years of use. It was about 4 feet long and perfectly balanced. The bristles at one end were worn but still attached firmly to the handle. Perfect, Deho said quietly to himself. He turned around and nearly bumped into Minsu, a Nexian student. The silver-skinned alien looked confused. Human friend, I think you are in the wrong place. The good materials are at the front of the room. Thank you, but I found what I need. Minsu looked at the broomstick and tilted his head. That is for cleaning floors. You need to make a weapon. I know. Deho smiled and walked back toward the classroom. Behind him, he heard Minsu talking to another student in rapid Nexian. The words were too fast for the translation device, but the tone was clear. They thought the human had lost his mind. Back in the classroom, students worked frantically on their creations. Sparks flew as metal was cut and shaped. Energy hummed as power cores were connected to focusing crystals. The air smelled of hot metal and burned plastic. Deho sat in the back row with his broomstick across his knees. He closed his eyes and felt the weight of the wood. He tested the balance and flexibility of the handle. He examined how the bristles were attached. Other students glanced at him and whispered to each other. Some laughed quietly. Others looked worried that they might be missing something important. Commander Valix noticed the human sitting calmly, while everyone else worked like crazy. The Threnody walked over and looked down at the simple cleaning tool. Cadet Kim, are you having trouble finding suitable materials? No, sir. I have everything I need. Valix looked at the broomstick. That appears to be a maintenance tool. Yes, sir. The assignment is to create a weapon. I understand, sir. The commander waited for more explanation. When none came, he walked away with a puzzled expression. Time passed quickly. One by one, students finished their weapons and set them on the display table at the front of the room. Each creation was more impressive than the last. Energy weapons that could melt through armor, blades that vibrated at frequencies that could cut molecular bonds, projectile systems that used gravity to accelerate ammunition to incredible speeds. With 10 minutes left, every student had placed a weapon on the table except one. Deho stood up and walked to the front of the room. He placed his broomstick on the table next to a Draknor warhammer that hummed with contained energy. The laughter started immediately. First one student, then another, then half the class was making sounds of amusement. Even some of the species that did not show emotion seemed to be enjoying the joke. Commander Valix raised his hand and the room became quiet. Time is up. We will now begin the demonstrations. Commander Valix stood beside the display table like a judge at a trial. 47 weapons lay before him, each one representing months of study and years of dreams. The advanced combat students sat in their curved rows, waiting to show what they had learned. We will begin with the Draknor submissions, Valix announced. Thorek, the biggest student in the class, stood up slowly. His rock-like skin made grinding sounds as he moved. The weapon he had created was enormous. It looked like a warhammer, but energy flowed through channels carved into the metal head. Gravity Crusher Mark 7, Thorek said in his deep voice that shook the floor. The hammerhead contains 3 microgravity generators. On impact, it creates a localized gravity field 50 times normal strength. Valix nodded toward the testing area. A thick metal plate stood waiting, the same kind used to armor spaceships. Thorek lifted his hammer with both hands. Even for a Draknor, the weapon looked heavy. He swung it down toward the test plate. Just before impact, the hammerhead began to glow. When it hit the metal, the entire plate collapsed into itself like paper being crushed by an invisible hand. The class made impressed sounds. Even the proud Velkari students nodded in approval. Effective, Commander Valix noted. Next. Zara, a female Draknor, presented her creation. It was a spear with a tip that burned like a small sun. When she threw it at the test target, it went through 3 metal plates before embedding itself in the wall behind them. The Draknor weapons were all powerful and direct. Hammers that could break mountains. Axes that cut through solid steel like butter. Spears that could punch holes through battleship armor. Velkari submissions, Valix called. Kessitar stood up with obvious pride. His weapon looked like a whip, but made of pure energy instead of leather. Blue light danced along its length as he held the handle. Molecular disruption whip, he said, his forearms moving as he spoke. The energy field can slice through atomic bonds. Nothing can resist. He activated the weapon with a sound like lightning. The whip cracked through the air and cut a test block cleanly in half. The cut was so perfect that the 2 pieces stayed together until Kestar pushed them apart. Other Velkari students showed weapons that were just as impressive. Energy swords that could change length during combat. Throwing discs that curved through the air to hit targets behind cover. Nets made of crackling electricity that could trap and shock enemies. The Nexians went next. Their weapons were smaller, but incredibly precise. Dart guns that could hit targets from across the room. Blade launchers that fired spinning discs with perfect accuracy. Poison delivery systems that could affect enemies through their skin. Each demonstration was more amazing than the last. Students had combined technology from different worlds to create weapons that their home planets had never seen. Energy from Threnodi power cores. Metals from Draknor mining worlds. Crystals from the deep caves of Nexian moons. Deho watched from the back row with his arms crossed. Some students glanced at him between demonstrations. A few whispered to their friends and pointed in his direction. He could hear the word human being passed around the room in different languages. After 30 minutes, only one student had not presented his weapon. Cadet Kim, Commander Valix said, "Please demonstrate your creation." The room became very quiet. Even the air recycling system seemed to stop making noise. Deho stood up and walked to the front of the class. He picked up his broomstick from the display table. Some students could not hold back their laughter anymore. A group of young Velkari made clicking sounds with their mouths. 2 Draknor students made rumbling noises that sounded like giant rocks, rolling downhill. Even some of the usually polite Nexians covered their mouths to hide their amusement. "Silence," Valix commanded, but even he looked confused. "Cadet Kim, please explain your weapon to the class." Deho held the broomstick in both hands. The wooden handle felt warm and familiar. "This is a combat staff with integrated defensive capabilities." More laughter filled the room. Kessitar stood up from his seat. "Commander, this is insulting to the Academy and to all of us. The human has brought a cleaning tool and called it a weapon." "Let him speak," Valix said, though his voice showed he was losing patience. Deho continued as if nothing had happened. "The staff provides reach advantage in close combat. The bristles at one end can be used to distract or blind opponents. The wood is flexible enough to absorb impact but strong enough to deliver strikes." A Draknor student named Grok laughed so hard that dust fell from the ceiling. "Human thinks he can fight energy weapons with a stick." "The design is time-tested," Deho went on. "Humans have used similar weapons for thousands of years. Sometimes simple solutions are the most effective." Commander Valix walked over to examine the broomstick more closely. He picked it up and felt its weight. "Cadet Kim, this is unmodified wood and plant fibers. There are no energy systems, no advanced materials, no technological enhancements." "That is correct, sir. The other students have created weapons that can cut through armor, generate crushing gravity fields, and disrupt matter at the atomic level." "Yes, sir." "And you believe this cleaning implement can compete with such advanced technology?" "I do, sir." The commander handed the broomstick back to Deho. For a moment, something like respect flickered in his eyes. Then it was gone. "Very well. We will test all weapons in combat situations. Each student will face an opponent using academy training weapons. He looked around the room. However, since Cadet Kim has chosen such an unusual approach, I believe he deserves a special challenge. Valix pointed at Kesistar. You will demonstrate your molecular whip against the human and his staff. The Velkari student's eyes lit up with excitement. It would be my honor, Commander. Deho nodded calmly. I accept. The other students began talking excitedly among themselves. This would not be a fair fight. Kesitar was bigger, stronger, and had 4 arms. His weapon could cut through solid metal. The human had a stick with some old bristles on the end. In the observation gallery above the classroom, other instructors began to gather. Word was spreading through the academy that something unusual was about to happen. Lieutenant Suman Choi, the human tactical advisor, arrived just as the combat area was being prepared. She looked down at Deho with concern. As the only other human on the station, she felt responsible for his success. When she saw him holding a simple broomstick, her heart sank. What is he thinking? She whispered to herself. Dr. Jinwoo Park, a human observer from the diplomatic corps, stood beside her. Maybe he has a plan we do not see, or maybe he is about to embarrass our entire species, Suman replied. Down in the combat area, safety barriers rose from the floor. The testing space was 20 feet by 20 feet, enough room for 2 fighters to move around. Medical robots moved into position at the corners, ready to help if anyone got hurt badly. Commander Valak stood at the edge of the combat zone. This will be a standard engagement. First fighter to disable his opponent or force a surrender wins. Lethal force is not permitted, but serious injury is acceptable. He looked at both students. Kesitar, power your weapon to training levels only. The Velkari activated his molecular whip. Even at reduced power, the energy field glowed bright blue and made the air crackle. Ready, Commander. Cadet Kim? Daiho held his broomstick in a relaxed grip. Ready, sir. Students pressed against the safety barriers to get a better view. The advanced combat class had seen many demonstrations, but never anything like this. A human with a cleaning tool against a Velkari noble with an energy whip. Begin, Valix commanded. For a moment, neither fighter moved. Kestar held his whip ready, waiting for the human to make the first mistake. Deho stood calmly, the broomstick held across his body in a defensive position. Then Kestar attacked, and the real lesson began. Kestar moved like a hunter who had cornered his prey. His forearms gave him perfect balance as he circled around Deho. The molecular whip hummed with deadly energy, leaving traces of blue light in the air wherever it passed. The Velkari was bigger, stronger, and faster than the human. He had trained with weapons since he was a child. His people were natural warriors who had conquered 12 different star systems. This fight should have been over in seconds, but Deho did not look afraid. He stood in the center of the combat area, turning slowly to keep his opponent in sight. The broomstick felt light in his hands. He had held similar weapons thousands of times during his training on Earth. This is almost unfair, Kesitar said loud enough for everyone to hear. Perhaps I should use only 2 arms to make it more sporting. Some students laughed at the joke. Others shook their heads, thinking the fight was already over. Kesitar raised his whip above his head and brought it down in a diagonal strike that would have cut the human in half if it connected. The energy field screamed through the air fast enough to burn the oxygen around it. Deho stepped to his left and moved the broomstick upward in a simple blocking motion. Instead of trying to stop the whip, he let it slide along the wooden handle. The energy field followed the wood and struck the floor beside his feet, leaving a smoking line in the metal. The Velkari blinked in surprise. The human should have tried to dodge or block directly. Instead, he had redirected the attack using the whip's own momentum. Lucky, Kesitar muttered, but he sounded less confident than before. He attacked again, this time with a horizontal sweep meant to cut through the human's middle. There was no room to dodge this strike. The whip would reach from one wall to the other. Daiho dropped low, bending his knees until he was almost sitting. The energy whip passed over his head close enough to make his hair stand up. As it went by, he pushed upward with the broomstick and caught Kesitar behind the ankle. The Velkari had been putting all his strength into the horizontal strike. When his leg was swept out from under him, He lost his balance and stumbled forward. His whip struck the wall and scattered sparks across the combat area. Students who had been laughing a minute before were now watching with serious faces. In the observation gallery, Lieutenant Suman Choi leaned forward against the safety rail. "He's actually fighting," she whispered. Dr. Jinwoo Park nodded slowly. "More than that, he's winning." Kesitar got back to his feet, his blue skin darker, with anger. "Stop running, coward. Fight me properly." "I am fighting," Deho replied calmly. "You are the one having trouble." The Velkari student made a sound like steam escaping from a pressure valve. He activated his whip to maximum training power. The blue energy field became so bright that some students had to look away. This time he did not try to be clever. He lashed out with pure fury, sending strike after strike toward the human. The whip moved so fast it looked like blue lightning filling the combat area. Daiho moved like water flowing around stones. When the whip came high, he bent low. When it swept left, he stepped right. When it thrust forward, he turned sideways. The broomstick was always in the right place at the right time, deflecting strikes that came too close to dodge. But he was not just defending. Each time Kesitar attacked, Daiho moved a little closer. The combat area was only 20 feet across, and the human was using every inch of it. After 30 seconds of continuous attacks, Kesitar was breathing hard. Velkari were strong, but using a molecular whip at full power took enormous energy. Sweat ran down his blue skin as he tried to land just one solid hit on the dancing human. Daiho saw his chance. As the whip came down in another overhead strike, he stepped forward instead of back. The energy field passed behind him as he moved inside Kesitar's reach. Before the Velkari could react, the human thrust the bristled end of the broomstick directly into his face. The old cleaning bristles were not sharp, but they did not need to be. Kesitar's eyes filled with dust and small fibers. He stumbled backward, blinking and trying to clear his vision. That was when Daiho struck for real. He spun the broomstick in his hands and drove the wooden handle into a specific point, just below Kesitar's right shoulder. It looked like a simple poke, but the Velkari's arm went completely limp. The molecular whip fell from his numb fingers and clattered on the floor. "Pressure point," Dr. Park explained quietly to Lieutenant Choi. "Human martial arts teach us to disable opponents by attacking nerve clusters." Kester tried to pick up his weapon with his other hands, but Daiho was already moving. The broomstick swept low and knocked the Velkari's legs out from under him. As he fell, the human used the wooden handle like a lever to flip him completely. Kesitar landed hard on his back with Daiho standing over him. The broomstick was pressed gently against the Velkari's throat, not enough to hurt but enough to make a point. "Do you surrender?" Daiho asked. The combat area was completely silent. 46 students stared in shock at what they had just seen. The proud Velkari noble, with his advanced energy weapon and superior physical abilities, was lying defeated on the floor. Above him stood a human with a cleaning tool. "I surrender," Kesitar whispered. Commander Valak stepped into the combat area. He looked down at the Velkari student, then up at the human who had beaten him. "Explain your methodology, Cadet Kim." Daiho stepped back and held up the broomstick. "Every weapon has strengths and weaknesses, sir. The molecular whip is very powerful, but it requires space to be effective. It also takes time to change direction after each strike." He pointed to the wooden handle. "This staff gave me reach and leverage. More importantly, it gave me options. I could use it to block, redirect, strike, or sweep. My opponent had only one option: the whip. And the pressure point strike? Human martial arts teach us that knowing your opponent's body is as important as knowing weapons. Every species has vulnerable spots if you know where to look." Valak nodded slowly. "And the psychological aspect?" Daiho almost smiled. "Everyone expected me to lose because my weapon looked simple. That made them careless. They saw what they wanted to see instead of what was really happening." The commander walked around the combat area, looking at the scorch marks from the energy, whip, and the spots where the two fighters had moved. "In 3 minutes, you defeated a larger, stronger opponent with superior technology." "Yes, sir." "Using a broomstick." "Yes, sir." Valak stopped walking and faced the class. Does anyone still think Cadet Kim brought a cleaning tool to a weapons demonstration? No one answered. Even the students who had been laughing loudest were now looking at the human with new respect. This concludes today's testing, the commander announced. All weapons will be evaluated based on effectiveness in combat. Class dismissed. As students filed out of the room, many of them stared at Daeho as they passed. Some nodded respectfully. Others looked confused, as if they had just watched magic happen. Kessatar sat up slowly, rubbing his throat where the broomstick had been pressed. How did you know about Valkyrie nerve clusters? I studied anatomy files for every species in the class, Daeho replied, offering his hand to help the alien student stand up. I also practiced against holographic opponents with different body types. The Valkyrie accepted the help and got to his feet. You planned this entire fight before it started. I planned for many possible fights. This was just one of them. For a moment, the two students stood looking at each other. Then Kessatar did something no one expected. He bowed his head in the traditional Valkyrie gesture of respect. I was wrong about humans, he said. I would be honored to learn from you. Word of the broomstick fight spread through the academy like wildfire. By evening, every instructor and student on Station Kepler 7 had heard the story. Some versions were more accurate than others, but they all had the same ending. A human had defeated an advanced energy weapon using nothing but a stick and his knowledge of combat. The lesson was clear, even if not everyone understood it yet. In the right hands, anything could be a weapon. 3 days after the broomstick demonstration, the Academy of Universal Combat Arts looked different to everyone who lived there. Students walked the halls with new questions in their minds. Instructors held emergency meetings to discuss what they had witnessed. Even the cleaning staff noticed that their equipment was being looked at with new interest. Lieutenant Suman Choi found Daeho in the Academy library. He sat at a corner table covered with books and data tablets. The materials were not about weapons or combat techniques. Instead, he was reading about alien biology, cultural practices, and historical fighting methods from dozens of different worlds. May I sit down? She asked in Korean. Daeho looked up and smiled. Of course, Lieutenant. It is good to speak our language again. Suman pulled out a chair and sat across from him. As the only human instructor at the academy, she had watched his progress with both hope and worry. That fight with Kestar was not luck, was it? No, ma'am. I have been preparing for something like it since I arrived here. How? Daeho closed the book he had been reading. It was about Draknor bone structure and muscle attachment points. When I got to this academy, I realized something important. Every other species here has advantages I do not have. Valkyrie are faster and have 4 arms. Draknor are stronger than 10 humans. Nexians can see and move in ways we cannot match. He gestured at the pile of books. So I decided to find a different advantage. I studied every species in detail. How they move, how they think, how they fight. I learned about their weak points and their cultural blind spots. Suman picked up another book from the stack. This one was about Threnodi military history. You studied our enemies? I studied everyone. Allies, enemies, instructors, fellow students. Knowledge is the one weapon that works against any opponent. And the broomstick? Daeho leaned back in his chair. Human martial arts have always taught us that any object can become a weapon if you understand its properties. A stick, a rope, a piece of cloth, even eating chopsticks. The key is not what you hold but how you think. Lieutenant Choi had been a soldier for 15 years. She had fought in 3 different conflicts and trained hundreds of cadets. But she had never heard anyone talk about combat the way this young man did. Why did you not tell the other instructors about your research? Because they would not have believed it. Daeho replied simply. Humans are new to space warfare. Everyone assumes we are primitive compared to species that have been fighting among the stars for thousands of years. So you decided to prove them wrong. I decided to show them that there are different ways to be strong. The library doors opened and Commander Valix walked in. The Threnodi instructor looked around until he spotted the 2 humans in the corner. He approached their table with measured steps. Lieutenant Choi, Cadet Kim. He nodded to each of them. I hope I am not interrupting important studies. Not at all, Commander, Suman replied. We were just discussing teaching methods. Valix looked at the books scattered across the table. His eyes paused on titles about alien anatomy and combat psychology. Cadet Kim, I have reviewed the recordings of your fight with Kessitar multiple times. I have also consulted with other instructors about what we witnessed. Yes, sir? Your technique was flawless. Every movement had purpose. Every decision was correct. That level of performance does not come from natural talent alone. Daeho met the commander's gaze steadily. I have been training since I was 6 years old, sir. My father taught me traditional Korean martial arts. When I decided to join the galactic military, I adapted those techniques for different opponents. Show me, Valix said suddenly. Sir? The commander gestured toward an open area between the library shelves. Demonstrate your combat principles without an opponent. I want to understand how human fighting methods work. Daeho stood up and moved to the clear space. He picked up a long ruler from one of the study tables, something similar in length to his broomstick. Traditional staff work begins with understanding distance and timing, he said as he began to move. The ruler flowed through the air in smooth patterns. Every attack creates an opening. Every defense sets up a counterattack. He moved faster, the plastic ruler becoming a blur as it spun and thrust and swept through imaginary opponents. But his movements were not wild. Each technique flowed naturally into the next, like water following the path of least resistance. Human martial arts teach us to use an opponent's strength against them, Daeho continued as he demonstrated. A large enemy moves slowly, so we stay mobile. A fast enemy attacks recklessly, so we redirect their momentum. A strong enemy relies on power, so we target their weak points. He stopped moving and returned to face Commander Valix. The weapon does not matter as much as the principles behind using it. The Threnody instructor was quiet for a long moment. His forearms moved in the gesture his people used when they were thinking deeply. You have turned combat into a science, he finally said. My people have been fighting wars for 10,000 years. Daeho replied. We learned to study everything that could help us survive. Lieutenant Choi spoke up. Commander, if I may ask, what does this mean for the Academy's teaching methods? Valix looked at her, then back at Daeho. It means we have been thinking about warfare too narrowly. We have focused on building better weapons while ignoring the minds that use them. He turned toward the library exit. Cadet Kim, report to my office at 0800 tomorrow. I want to discuss some changes to your class schedule. After the commander left, Suman and Daeho sat back down at their table. Around them, other students continued studying, but several had been watching the demonstration with interest. What do you think he wants? Suman asked. I think he wants to learn, Daeho replied. The same thing everyone here should want. That evening, news of the library demonstration spread through the academy even faster than the original fight story. Students who had not seen the broomstick battle heard detailed descriptions from those who had been there. Instructors discussed what they had learned about human combat methods. In the mess hall, an unusual thing happened. Instead of sitting with their own species, students began mixing at different tables. Velkari sat with Nexians. Draknor shared meals with smaller species they usually ignored. At the center of many conversations was the same question. What else could they learn from each other? Kessitar approached Daeho during dinner. The proud Velkari noble looked different than he had before their fight. More thoughtful, less arrogant, human. Friend, he said, I've been thinking about our combat. You said you studied every species in the class. That is correct. What did you learn about fighting Velkari? Daeho finished chewing his food before answering. Your people are naturally aggressive fighters. You prefer direct attacks and rely on your physical advantages. But that same aggressiveness makes you predictable. You also have trouble changing tactics once you commit to an attack pattern. Kestar sat down across from him. And you used this knowledge to defeat me. I used it to survive our fight. Defeating you was not the goal. Then what was the goal? Daeho looked around the mess hall at all the different species talking and learning from each other. To show everyone that there are always new ways to approach old problems. Other students at nearby tables had stopped eating to listen to the conversation. Word by word, the human was changing how they thought about combat, about learning, about each other. Professor Minho Lee, the Academy's head of theoretical combat studies, approached their table. He was an older human with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Cadet Kim, I have been reviewing your academic records. Your scores in weapons training are excellent, but your theoretical knowledge scores are even better. Thank you, Professor. I am particularly interested in your essay about adaptive combat principles. You wrote that the most dangerous warrior is not the one with the best weapon, but the one who can think fastest in changing situations. Daeho nodded. Wars are won by minds, not by equipment. Professor Lee smiled. I would like you to give a guest lecture to my advanced theory class next week. The topic will be human approaches to tactical problem solving. Students at surrounding tables began talking excitedly. A cadet giving lectures to advanced classes was almost unheard of at the academy. I would be honored, Professor. As the evening went on, more instructors stopped by Daeho's table. They asked questions about human martial arts, about tactical thinking, about ways to teach students to be more adaptable in combat. Lieutenant Choi watched it all with growing amazement. In just a few days, one young man with a broomstick had started to change how the most prestigious military academy in the galaxy thought about warfare, but the real changes were only beginning. 6 weeks had passed since the broomstick demonstration. The Academy of Universal Combat Arts was no longer the same place it had been before that day. Students walked through the halls carrying unusual objects, testing their weight and balance. Instructors held meetings that lasted late into the night, redesigning courses that had not changed in centuries. Commander Valak stood in front of the Academy Council, the group of senior officers who decided how the school operated. Representatives from 12 different species sat around the curved table, their attention focused on the data displays floating in the air above them. The results speak for themselves, Valak said as he pointed to a series of charts. Since implementing human-inspired training methods, our students have improved in every measurable category. Admiral Torvin, an elderly Draknor who had run the academy for 30 years, studied the numbers with his deep stone eyes. Explain these improvements, Commander. Combat efficiency is up 40%. Tactical problem solving has increased by 60%. Most significantly, student innovation scores have doubled. The council members made various sounds of interest in their different languages. These were impressive numbers, especially for an academy that already produced the best military officers in the galaxy. What specific changes have been made? Asked General Yix, a Nexian with silver skin that changed color as she spoke. Valak activated another display. We have introduced adaptive combat theory as a mandatory course. Students learn to evaluate any environment for tactical advantages. They practice creating weapons from common materials. Most importantly, they study different species fighting methods to understand both strengths and weaknesses. Captain Suro, a Threnody like Valak's but much older, leaned forward in his chair. And this is all based on observations of one human. Cadet Kim has become Assistant Instructor Kim, Valak corrected. His methods have proven successful with students from every species. The commander activated a video recording. It showed Daeho leading a mixed species class in what looked like an empty room. Students held various objects, cleaning tools, eating utensils, pieces of furniture, and moved through combat drills. The human teaches that warfare is fundamentally about problem solving, Valak explained as they watched. Advanced technology provides better tools, but tactical thinking determines how effectively those tools are used. In the recording, a young Velkari student was practicing with a mop. Under Daeho's guidance, she learned to use it as a staff, a shield, and even a net to entangle opponents. What had seemed like a joke 6 weeks ago now looked like serious military training. Admiral Torvin made a deep rumbling sound. I have received reports from other academies asking about our new methods. Word is spreading through military circles across the galaxy. What do they want to know? Asked General Yix. Whether the improvements are real, whether these human techniques can be taught to their own students. whether this represents a new era in military education. The council members looked at each other. Changes in military doctrine were rare and important. When they happened, they affected entire civilizations. I recommend full implementation, Valak said. Replace the old weapons specialization program with the new adaptive combat curriculum. Make it the standard for all military academies in the Galactic Defense Network. That is a significant change, Admiral Torvin noted. Are you certain these results will continue? Instead of answering directly, Valak activated one more recording. This one showed the Academy's latest graduation exercise. Instead of the traditional weapons demonstration, students faced surprise scenarios with unknown challenges. They watched a Draknor heavy weapons specialist adapt to fighting in zero gravity using only a maintenance kit. A Nexian scout created camouflage from food scraps and defeated opponents who could not see him coming. Most impressively, a group of mixed species worked together using techniques borrowed from each other's cultures to solve problems none could handle alone. These students are not just better fighters, Valak said. They are better thinkers. They approach problems with creativity instead of relying only on standard procedures. Captain Suro asked the question everyone was thinking. What does Instructor Kim say about all this attention? Valak almost smiled, something unusual for a Threnodi. He says that humans have always known these things. They are surprised it took so long for other species to ask them about it. The vote was unanimous. The Academy Council approved the complete restructuring of military education based on human adaptive combat principles. Within 6 months, every military academy in the Galactic Defense Network would begin teaching the new curriculum. But the changes went deeper than just military schools. Down in the Academy workshop, students from Advanced Tactical Theory were working on their final projects. Instead of building weapons, they were solving problems. Real problems that existed throughout the galaxy. Minsu, the Nexian student who had questioned Daho's broomstick choice, was working with a team of Draknor engineers. Together, they were designing new mining equipment that could work in environments too dangerous for traditional machines. The human approach is to ask different questions, Minsu explained to a visiting reporter. Instead of, how do we build a better drill, we ask, how do we extract resources without putting workers at risk? Their solution used principles borrowed from human martial arts. Instead of fighting against dangerous conditions, their equipment flowed around them. Instead of using brute force, it found weak points in rock formations and applied pressure precisely where it would be most effective. Kesitar was leading another project team, working on improvements to spaceship defense systems. The proud Velkari had become one of Daho's most dedicated students after their combat encounter. Traditional shields try to stop every attack, he explained to the same reporter. Human thinking suggests we redirect attacks instead of absorbing them. Use the enemy's own force against their other ships. The new shield systems his team designed could actually turn incoming weapons fire into defensive barriers. Energy that would have damaged the ship was instead channeled into protecting other vessels in the fleet. These were not just academic exercises. Military contractors from across the galaxy were paying attention to what Academy students were creating. Several projects had already been purchased for real-world implementation. Professor Minho Lee had been documenting all these changes for a research paper that was becoming a book. We are witnessing the emergence of a new military philosophy, he told anyone who would listen. Humans have introduced concepts that are changing how every species thinks about conflict. But perhaps the most important changes were happening in the Academy mess hall. Tables that had once been separated by species were now mixed. Students who had never spoken to each other before worked together on projects. Cultural exchange had become as important as weapons training. Daiho sat with a group that included representatives from 8 different worlds. They were discussing a theoretical scenario about defending a space station with limited resources. Velkari tactics would be to attack the enemy directly, Kesitar was saying. Draknor strategy would focus on heavy fortification, added Grok. Nexians would use speed and precision strikes, said Minsu. What would humans do? Asked Vera, a young Threnodi student. Daiho thought for a moment. We would ask why the enemy wants the station in the first place. Maybe the real solution is to make them not wanted anymore. The conversation continued, but now it included ideas from all species represented. Velkari aggression combined with Draknor strength and Nexian precision, all guided by human tactical flexibility. Lieutenant Sumin Choi watched these interactions with pride. The young man she had worried about was not just succeeding, he was changing the entire academy culture. Captain Sun Ho Jang, the new human liaison to the academy, arrived that week with news from Earth. The human government had been contacted by military leaders from dozens of worlds. They all wanted the same thing: access to human military advisors and training programs. Earth Command is sending 50 instructors to various academies across the galaxy, he told Daeho during a private meeting. They want you to help select and train them. Me, sir? I am still a cadet. Captain Jang smiled. Actually, you are being promoted to lieutenant. Your new assignment is to establish the first Galactic Center for Adaptive Combat Studies. You will teach other instructors how to implement human tactical methods throughout the military education system. That evening, as Daeho walked through the academy halls, he passed the Hall of Revolutionary Weapons. The broomstick he had used in that first demonstration was now displayed in a place of honor, surrounded by the most famous weapons in galactic history. The placard beneath it read, "Sometimes the greatest weapon is the one your enemy never sees coming." Students stopped to look at the display every day. Some laughed, remembering when they thought it was just a cleaning tool. Others studied it seriously, trying to understand the lesson it represented. The lesson was spreading far beyond station. Kepler 7. Human adaptive combat principles were being taught on hundreds of worlds. Military doctrine was changing throughout the galaxy, and it all started with one young man who decided that any object could be a weapon if you knew how to think about it properly, but the real revolution was not. 1 year after the broomstick demonstration, the galaxy was a different place. Lieutenant Daeho Kim stood on the observation deck of the new Galactic Center for Adaptive Combat Studies, watching ships arrive from across known space. Representatives from over 300 worlds had come to attend the first Universal Military Doctrine Conference. They were here to learn about the revolution in tactical thinking that had started with a simple cleaning tool. The center itself was built on Harmony Station, a neutral meeting place between the major galactic powers. Unlike traditional military facilities, this one was designed for learning and cooperation rather than fighting. The main conference hall could hold delegates from every known species, with translation systems for over 800 different languages. Captain Sun Ho Jang joined Daeho at the observation window. The older human looked tired but satisfied. He had spent the past year traveling to military academies throughout the galaxy, helping them implement the new training methods. How many academies are using the full curriculum now? Daeho asked. 417 confirmed, with more joining every month, Sun Ho replied. The results are consistent everywhere. Students are more creative, more adaptable, and work better with other species. Through the window, they could see a transport ship from the Outer Rim territories docking at the station. These were worlds that had never participated in galactic military cooperation before, but even they wanted to learn about human tactical methods. Admiral Torvin wants to speak with you before the opening ceremony, Sun Ho continued. He has some interesting news from the Academy Council. They made their way through the station's corridors, passing delegates from species Daeho had never seen before. The galaxy was much bigger and more diverse than most people realized. But now, for the first time, representatives from all these different worlds were coming together to share knowledge about warfare and defense. Admiral Torvin was waiting in his temporary office, surrounded by displays showing military data from across the galaxy. The old Draknor looked up as the two humans entered. Lieutenant Kim, Captain Jang, thank you for coming. His deep voice carried the weight of authority earned through decades of military service. I wanted you to hear this news before the conference begins. He activated a holographic display showing casualty statistics from recent conflicts. Since implementing human adaptive combat methods, military effectiveness has improved across all participating worlds, but more importantly, actual combat deaths have decreased by 30%. Daeho studied the numbers with surprise. How is that possible, sir? Your tactical methods emphasize problem-solving over pure aggression. Soldiers trained in adaptive combat theory find ways to win battles without destroying everything in their path. They disable rather than kill. They outthink rather than overpower. The Admiral changed the display to show economic data. Reconstruction. Costs after conflicts have dropped by 50%. Diplomatic solutions are being found for disputes that would have become wars under the old methods. Captain Yang whistled softly. The human way of fighting is actually reducing the amount of fighting. Precisely. This conference is not just about military training anymore. We are discussing a fundamental change in how civilized species resolve conflicts. Admiral Torvin stood up, his massive frame filling the small office. Lieutenant Kim, the Academy Council has voted to offer you a position as Director of Tactical Innovation for the entire Galactic Defense Network. You would oversee the implementation of adaptive combat methods throughout our military forces. Daeho was quiet for a long moment. A year ago, he had been an unknown cadet with a broomstick. Now he was being offered one of the highest positions in Galactic Military Command. I am honored by the offer, Admiral, but I think I can do more good as a teacher than as an administrator. The old Draknor made a rumbling sound that was the equivalent of laughter. I hoped you would say that. Teachers change the future. Administrators just manage the present. The opening ceremony of the Universal Military Doctrine Conference was held in the station's main amphitheater. Delegates from hundreds of worlds filled the curved seating areas, their different forms and colors creating a living rainbow of galactic diversity. Commander Valix, now promoted to Admiral and head of all military academies, stepped up to the speaking platform. 1 year ago, a human cadet chose an unusual weapon for a class demonstration. Today, we gather to discuss how that choice has changed the way our entire galaxy thinks about warfare. He gestured toward the display screens around the amphitheater, which showed images from military academies across known space. Students of different species worked together, learning from each other's techniques and cultures. The human concept of adaptive combat has proven successful beyond our highest expectations, but its impact goes far beyond military training. We have seen increased cooperation between species, better problem-solving methods in civilian industries, and new approaches to diplomatic negotiations. The crowd made various sounds of agreement in dozens of different languages. Translation systems worked overtime to keep everyone informed of what was being said. Today, we will hear from representatives of worlds that have implemented these new methods. We will share successes and discuss challenges. Most importantly, we will plan how to continue spreading these ideas throughout the galaxy. Admiral Valix paused and looked directly at Daeho, who was sitting in the front row with other human delegates. But first, I think we should hear from the person who started all of this. Lieutenant Daeho Kim, would you please address the conference? Daeho had not expected to speak so early in the program, but he stood up and walked to the platform. Looking out at the hundreds of delegates, he felt the weight of how much had changed since that day in the academy classroom. Honored delegates, he began. When I picked up that broomstick a year ago, I was not trying to revolutionize galactic warfare. I was just trying to pass a class assignment. Laughter rippled through the audience from species capable of the sound. The lesson I learned that day was not about weapons or fighting techniques. It was about the power of looking at old problems in new ways. Every species in this room has knowledge and techniques that others can learn from. The key is to ask questions instead of making assumptions. He activated a display showing video from recent military exercises where mixed species teams worked together, using techniques from all their different worlds. In these exercises, Velkari speed combines with Draknor strength and Nexian precision, all guided by adaptive thinking principles. The results are better than any single species could achieve alone. The video showed a complex battle simulation where teams had to capture a defended position with limited resources. Instead of direct assault, the mixed teams had found creative solutions. They used Velkari energy manipulation to create diversions, Draknor engineering skills to build unexpected routes of attack, and Nexian stealth abilities to gather intelligence. This is what happens when we share knowledge instead of hoarding it, Daeho continued. When we learn from each other instead of assuming our way is the only way. He changed the display to show civilian applications of adaptive combat principles. Construction teams were using martial arts concepts to build structures in dangerous environments. Diplomatic corps were applying tactical thinking to solve political disputes. Even scientists were using problem-solving methods borrowed from military training. The broomstick was never the real weapon, Deho said as he concluded his speech. The real weapon was the willingness to think differently. That weapon belongs to all of us. The applause that followed came in many forms. Some species clapped their hands or appendages. Others made musical sounds or changed the color of their skin. The Draknor stomped their feet, creating a thunderous rhythm that shook the station. Over the next 3 days, the conference heard presentations from military leaders across the galaxy. Each had their own story about how human adaptive combat methods had changed their forces. General Crix from the Outer Rim reported that border disputes had decreased by 60% since his forces learned negotiation techniques based on tactical problem-solving. Instead of fighting over resources, different species were finding ways to share them. Colonel Ness from the Core Worlds described how mixed species units were outperforming single-species forces in every category. Diversity of thought creates stronger military units, she explained. When soldiers can think like their allies and understand their enemies, they make better decisions. Captain Zorn from the Frontier Territories had perhaps the most interesting story. His forces had encountered a previously unknown hostile species at the edge of explored space. Instead of engaging in immediate combat, they had used adaptive thinking principles to study the aliens and find ways to communicate. We discovered that what looked like aggression was actually their way of showing respect, he reported. Once we understood their culture, we were able to establish peaceful contact. They are now applying to join the Galactic Defense Network as allies instead of fighting us as enemies. But the most significant presentation came from an unexpected source. Kestar, the Velkari noble who had been defeated by Deho's broomstick, now held the rank of colonel in his planetary defense force. He had become one of the